have to slow this bill down, give it proper study, and raise public awareness of the regressive changes it makes. I'm so proud that across Canada, citizens like you continue to speak out against Harper's omnibus budget bill and continue to stand together and show the Conservatives that Canadians did not support this reckless, undemocratic budget. I'll be voting throughout the night tonight, and I will be taking strength from the show of support and commitment here today. Thank you so much for your continued support and activism.
You mess with nature, it'll mess with us.
Okay, I'm back to being Chris Micah and making terrible and awful noises in the downtown of Halifax. So, I'm with Project Democracy, and I wanted to say a couple of words about what exactly is in this gigantic omnibus bill C-38. There's a litany of problems found in the 452 pages of the bill called, in Orwellian newspeak, the Jobs, Growth and Long-Term Prosperity Act.
It does job long-term growth and prosperity, completely.
So how exactly is Stephen Harper planning to achieve jobs, growth and long-term prosperity for the Canadian people? Well, the Environmental Assessment Agency is being scrapped and replaced with a new and much more limited one, which, interestingly enough, never mentions the words climate change. Many provisions of the Environmental Assessment Agency are being undercut. The Kyoto Protocol Implementation Act is being killed. The Fisheries Act, the legislative bedrock of protection for fish, fisheries, and fishers, is being gutted.
Shame!
The Navigable Waters Protection Act is being weakened to exempt pipelines and power lines.
Shame!
Decisions of the National Energy Board cannot be reversed by Cabinet, which makes the whole process of hearings, such as those being conducted on the Northern Gateway Pipeline, a farce. If Stephen Harper and his cronies can simply snap a finger and discard them all. The Species at Risk Act is being compromised to allow various exemptions. A fifth of Parks Canada staff are being cut. The National Roundtable on the Environment and Economy is being liquidated.
Shame!
Oil, gas, and nuclear regulations are being made less friendly and rigorous, and less environmentally rigorous and more industry friendly.
Less friendly to the people?
Environment Canada's environmental effects program will be scaled back and the municipal water and wastewater survey cut. The list goes on and on. Does any of this sound like jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity to you?
No! We're the ones being
Why
jobbed.
the majority of these belong in the budget implementation bill is anyone's guess. But wait, that's not all. Bill C-38 will also repeal the Fair Wages and Hours of Labor Act.
Why is that a thing?
It will affect health transfers to provinces to the tune of $31 billion. It will end the Auditor General's oversight of agencies such as the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the Northern Pipeline Agency, and Canada Revenue Agency, providing Canadians with less rather than more transparency.
Shame!
It will liquidate organizations such as Rights and Democracy, the National Council of Welfare, and the First Nations Statistical Institute. It will implement contentious changes to employment insurance. Exactly. It will increase the age at which Canadians are eligible for old age security. It will remove federal contractors from the protection of the employee. It will liquidate organizations such as Rights and Democracy, the National Council of Welfare, and the First Nations Statistical Institute. It will implement contentious changes to employment insurance. Exactly. It will increase the age at which Canadians are eligible for old age security. It will remove federal contractors from the protection of the Employment Equity Act. Again, the list goes on and on. Does any of this sound like jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity to you?
No!
But I'm not going to speak to you about these issues. We'll be hearing later on from a number of speakers who will discuss some of these regressive and profoundly undemocratic measures. What I want to talk to you about is just one thing: the abuse of democracy. The idea of shoveling over 70 pieces of legislation into one massive budget implementation bill and then asking parliamentarians to simply take it or leave it is a fundamental abuse of parliamentary process.
Hell yes!
Canadians elect members of parliament to provide oversight to the legislative process, to debate and discuss proposed legislation, to make constructive amendments, and in the end, give it their thumbs up or down. Throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, faucet, and drains, into one gigantic bill with a minuscule amount of time to consider it, debates behind closed doors without the oversight of many parliamentary committees that would normally consider such pieces of individual legislation, reduces Parliament and indeed Canadian constitutional democracy as a whole to a hollow shell. It is contempt of Canadian citizens and our rights to have government overseen by our elected representatives. Does democracy matter, or doesn't it?
It matters. There's time allocations too, and they're used as a holy sacrament.
If it does, it needs to be conducted in a sane, rational, and intelligent way, not as some kind of runaway juggernaut forced upon legislators and citizens alike. This isn't how the Canadian government was conceived by our founders. It isn't how parliamentary democracy is practiced around the world. That's the reason why Canadians in 83 centres across the country are rallying today, calling on all parliamentarians to reject this dreadful Trojan horse budget bill. They understand what it implies for democracy in Canada. The fact that Stephen Harper continues to be completely deaf to these demands illustrates his agenda: to degrade Canadian parliamentary democracy into a powerless appendage of the PMO, and then hope that Canadians won't notice. Are we going to let that happen?
No!
Today, in iPolitics, Michael Harris wrote, quote, "The metamorphosis of democracy into something else begins with forgetfulness, and it ends with an eerie silence where once there was a multitude of voices." If Stephen Harper succeeds in jamming this retrograde legislation down the throats of all Canadians, despite every effort by the combined opposition parties, despite the condemnation of 532 environmental, economic, human rights, and social justice organizations that took part in the Blackout Speak Out campaign, despite hundreds of rallies and thousands upon thousands of Canadians protesting this dreadful legislation, if he's prepared to write off and forget the kind of country that the majority of Canadians believe in, well, let's make sure we don't forget about Stephen Harper in the next election. Thank you very much.
I'm here today, I'm from the Canadian Energy and Paper Workers Union, but I'm here today representing the 25,000 workers in the HRM from the Halifax, Dartmouth and District Labour Council. I see lots of folks here actually from unions. I'm scared I'm going to fall off. I tend to move around, so I'm feeling a little trapped. At any rate, this bill and this government generally are a disaster for workers in this country. I'm moving away. You should be very worried, and clearly you are, the people that are here, about this bill. And Canadians should not be silent about it. I can't tell you what motivates this government. I have no idea. But this is certainly not a job bill. In fact, the bill, the measures in this budget bill will not increase, and they're seemingly obviously designed to decrease jobs in this country and to stimulate inequality and increase inequality. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about a few of the specific features of this bill that are basically on attack on the 80 to 90% of people in this country that are working people. So I'm going to start with employment insurance. In this bill, there will be cuts. Essentially, there are cuts to employment insurance. Fewer people will qualify, and those that qualify will be cut off faster. In Nova Scotia, where large numbers of us... Can you hear me?
Yes!
Hang on. In Nova Scotia, where large numbers of workers... Can you hear me?
Yes!
In Nova Scotia, where large numbers of workers work in seasonal industries and employment in fisheries, forestry, agriculture, tourism, where this government in Nova Scotia employs 2,000 people or so a year in seasonal jobs, we are going to see massive cuts to EI. The four Atlantic premiers have written to the four Atlantic premiers actually wrote to the Prime Minister asking for those changes to be thought again, because it's going to have such a major impact on Atlantic Canada. It's going to penalize regular workers of EI. It's guaranteed to reduce wages and wage demands, because you will not be able to wait for work in your field. You will not be able to wait for a job that pays close to what your previous job paid. You'll be expected to take almost any job. Apparently, they're just assuming that across this country there are tons of unemployed workers, and particularly in Atlantic Canada, in the last year, there were 12 to 15 workers for every available job that were unemployed. As Ed Broadbent said this morning, it's the serious problem in Canada is a slack of economy, not an abundance of slackers. In this budget, there will be cuts to OAS, to old age security. It's like a cut. People won't be able to access it until 67. Is that really because we can't afford it out of a $250 billion budget? Many of those older people who don't want to stay in the workforce, I mean, some might want to, but most people, especially lower paid workers who don't have pensions attached to their jobs, most of them do not want to work until 67. In fact, many of them will not be able to continue working until 67.
No health program either.
That's right. And the Harper government has refused the suggestions of the provinces last year. There was a big campaign, a lot of the provinces signed on, about increasing CPP. If we're, let's increase the amount that we as individuals and employers contribute to the Canada Pension Plan so that we can double within 15 years the amount that you could take out of the Canada Pension Plan. They outright rejected that. Only about 40% of Canadians have workplace pensions. So if people are just going to be hungry, people are just going to be not able to pay their power bill, they're just not going to be able to make ends meet. We're going to create a group of an underclass in this country that can't afford to live.
Shame.